What if the past we remember isn't the past that truly was? There are objects in this world, just real, tangible things that shouldn't exist. Not because they are dangerous or too complex to understand, but because they seem to emerge from a timeline not our own. Artifacts pulled from ancient soil or lost ruins that whisper of technologies far beyond the people who supposedly made them. A screw sealed inside 300-million-year-old rock. A skull carved from quartz that resonates with unseen energy. A wedge of aerospace-grade aluminum buried with Ice Age bones. These aren't myths. They've been measured, examined, analyzed in classified labs. And then, quietly sealed away. Each one defies a corner of our understanding. History, physics, engineering, time itself. Not as poetic symbols, but as material evidence. Evidence of minds that saw deeper than ours, of hands that shaped matter in ways we still can't replicate. Why do these things exist? And more hauntingly, why does no one speak of them? In a culture obsessed with forward momentum, we rarely look back with honesty. Our stories of progress rely on a linear tale, from fire to wheel to microchip. But reality is rarely linear. Sometimes it folds. Sometimes it skips. In deserts and jungles, in caves and vaults, lie objects that have no proper place in our historical narrative. They were not made by primitives. They could not be made by us. And yet, they are here. Some scientists called them anomalies, others hoaxes. But behind closed doors, the whispers are different. Government storage, unpublished reports, names redacted, projects shelved indefinitely. There's something uncomfortable about intelligence that isn't ours. About knowledge that predates not just our history books, but our very species. This series isn't about proving anything. It isn't about conspiracy or certainty. It's about mystery. And what happens when mystery meets memory? Each chapter will explore one such object, a forgotten artifact that seems to echo a deeper intelligence. Not fantasy, not fear, but wonder. We'll meet a memory metal that heals itself and folds back into form after violent distortion. A stone disc carved with microscopic blueprints for spaceflight. A skull that behaves like a transmitter. And a computer that predicted eclipses centuries in advance, and possibly more. We'll ask what they are, where they came from, but most of all, what they say about us. Because to look at these objects is to confront the limits of our imagination. To ask not just, did this come from elsewhere? But what if our past is missing pages? This isn't a story about aliens. It's a story about time, memory, and the things we've chosen to forget, or perhaps were made to forget. And so we begin, not with answers, but with a question. What if we've walked among the remnants of another world all along and never dared to see them for what they are? What if some metals remember more than we do? It began, as many stories do, in the stillness of the desert. July 1947. A thunderstorm rolled across the plains of New Mexico, and something fell from the sky. Ranchers found the wreckage first, strange debris scattered across the scrubland near Roswell. The military arrived soon after, sealing off the area. The official word: a weather balloon. But behind the fences and beside the hangars, something else was unfolding. Among the twisted remains was a piece of metal unlike anything seen before. It was feather-light, lighter than aluminum. Yet it resisted every tool brought against it. No blade could pierce it. No flame could burn it. And when crumpled in the hand, it slowly, impossibly, unfurled itself back to its original shape. Not dented, not damaged, just reset as if it remembered. The man who first studied the debris was Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer dispatched to collect it. Decades later, he still recalled the strangeness of that material, how it shimmered with a dull sheen, how it bent and twisted and healed. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, scientists examined it under microscopes. They saw molecular structures that shouldn't be there. Geometries too precise for nature, too advanced for mid-century metallurgy. This wasn't just an unusual alloy. It was something else entirely. The internal composition included isotopes not found on Earth. Isotopes that suggested a different kind of origin, not in place, but in time. A different kind of engineering, too, one that worked not by force but by design at the atomic level. One scientist likened it to programmable matter. Expose it to a frequency and it shifts. Color, conductivity, even its flexibility, adapting to the signal, as though it was made not just to exist, but to respond. Decades passed. Some pieces disappeared into vaults. Others reappeared in research labs, carefully compartmentalized under government programs. And still, no one could reverse engineer it. The closest we've come are the advances in modern composite materials, carbon fiber alloys, shape memory polymers. But even now, 75 years later, no known process can replicate the exact properties of that metal found in the desert. It resists oxidation. It radiates a faint electromagnetic signature, even without a power source. It remains, even today, unburned, unbroken, unmoved, and it is still classified. If the Roswell alloy is real, and many believe it is, then it represents more than an artifact. It represents a possibility. That somewhere, someone mastered a form of technology not by brute force, but by understanding how matter itself remembers. It raises a quiet, lingering question. What else fell that night? And what did we learn from it? Or fail to? Because if this metal is what it appears to be, then it holds a secret not just about another intelligence, but about our own limits, about how much we still don't understand. What does it mean when a thing long buried refuses to forget itself? What if electricity flowed before we knew its name? In the shadows of ancient Mesopotamia, buried beneath centuries of soil and silence, a puzzle was unearthed. Clay jars, simple at first glance, coarse terracotta vessels sealed with asphalt. Inside, copper cylinders wrapped around iron rods, forgotten relics from over 2,000 years ago. But when filled with a simple acidic solution, like vinegar or grape juice, they came to life. The jars produced electricity. To some, they were just a curiosity, perhaps medical tools or religious items, but others saw in them something else entirely: design, intent, a purpose written not in language but in voltage. They would become known as the Baghdad Batteries. In secret experiments carried out decades after their discovery, researchers found something extraordinary. When connected in sequence, the jars generated voltages that rival modern systems. Not a flicker, not a spark. Sustained current, stable and strong. And then came the questions. X-rays revealed microscopic wire patterns inside the copper. Not twisted strands, but structured networks like veins inside metal. Too fine to have been made with Bronze Age tools. Too precise to be accidents. And most shockingly, the materials weren't local. Traces of rare earth elements, ones not native to the region, hinted at trade routes or sources we have no record of. Some isotopes didn't even match Earth's crust. They weren't just power sources, they were storage systems. Batteries, yes, but engineered, designed to last. And then the story deepened. Excavations, quietly sealed from public view, revealed chambers beneath the ground, wired together by copper networks spanning kilometers. Like a primitive power grid hidden beneath ancient soil. What could they have powered? Lighting, communication, tools, or something we can no longer imagine? It's a strange notion that while the Western world marks the birth of electricity in the 18th century, another people, long gone, may have harnessed it in the flickering torchlight of antiquity. Some researchers believe the Baghdad cells represent a fragment, one piece of a forgotten science, a remnant of knowledge passed down, misunderstood, or lost in the slow churn of empires. Others whisper of contact, of knowledge that came not from within, but from elsewhere, delivered like fire to Prometheus. Held in clay, waiting for rediscovery. Whether born of ancient genius or something more, the Baghdad Batteries stand as quiet contradictions. They ask not just what was possible, but when. They challenge the story we've written about progress, that it is always forward, that our ancestors were always behind us. But what if, now and then, in small sparks and hidden chambers, they were ahead? What if ancient hands once built tomorrow's machines? It rested beneath the sea for nearly 2 millennia, buried in the quiet silt of a forgotten shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera. When divers found it in 1901, it looked like a rusted chunk of bronze, broken, barnacled, unspectacular. But within that corroded casing was something astonishing, a system of gears so precise, so intricate, that it shouldn't have existed for another 1,500 years. Some called it the world's first analog computer, but even that may undersell it, because this wasn't just a calculator. It was a machine that modeled time itself. Dozens of gears, meshing in harmony, each tooth carefully counted, dial faces inscribed with lunar phases, planetary cycles, solar eclipses. The Antikythera Mechanism could predict celestial events with shocking accuracy. Eclipses decades in advance. Phases of the moon, positions of the planets, all rendered in metal, moved by a single turn of a crank. That alone is enough to stagger the mind. But some researchers, working in hidden laboratories with the full range of modern imaging, found even more. Beneath the visible gearwork, inside the tiniest cavities, were structures that behaved unlike any mechanical parts from antiquity. Their ratios didn't just reflect ancient astronomy. Some encoded constants known only to modern quantum physics. In one analysis, rotating one gear appeared to trigger changes in another gear, separated by space, with no visible connection. A mechanical entanglement. Correlation without contact. Not just complexity, but behavior that suggested principles we associate with quantum computing. Could this have been a coincidence? Or had the Greeks, or someone before them, touched the edge of something deeper? Carbon dating of embedded materials yielded strange results. Parts of the device dated to the expected era, 1st century BCE, but others? Decades old, as if pieces of the machine refused to age in linear time, as if the object somehow existed in 2 temporal frames at once. And the materials? Bronze, yes, but with microscopic crystalline inclusions that enabled conductivity far beyond anything expected from that alloy. Like a hybrid of ancient metalwork and modern electronics. Was it ever meant to be powered? Or was the movement itself the energy? The Antikythera Mechanism raises profound questions, not just about knowledge lost, but about knowledge that should never have been known. No other mechanism like it has ever been found from its era. It appears fully formed, as though plucked from a future moment and dropped into the ancient world. There are no prototypes, no simpler versions. Just this, a single artifact of staggering sophistication. And then, nothing. We think of progress as a line. This object suggests a spiral, that perhaps at some point a burst of understanding came and went. A civilization, or a mind, that glimpsed the machine behind the sky, and left behind a model, one that still works. What if thought could leave an imprint, carved not in words, but in light? In the ruins of a collapsed Mayan temple, deep in the rainforests of Belize, an explorer's daughter uncovered something resting in the earth like a secret. It wasn't a fossil, it wasn't gold, it was a human skull, carved from a single block of pure quartz. The surface was flawless. Oh, no tool marks, no seams, no indication of how it had been shaped. anatomically precise, translucent, cold to the touch, and yet strangely alive. That skull would become known as the Mitchell-Hedges skull, the most famous of a dozen others found across the globe. In Tibet, in Mongolia, in South America, no two identical, but all impossibly crafted. And all, it seems, connected. When scientists at Hewlett-Packard tested the original in the 1970s, they found something unsettling. The crystal had been carved against its natural axis, a process that, even with modern tools, would shatter the material. To do so without causing internal fractures requires knowledge of optics, stress dispersion, and mechanical precision that only laser-guided tools could replicate. And yet no such tools existed when or if these skulls were made. But deeper still, within the crystal matrix, researchers discovered microscopic structures resembling fiber optic channels, internal corridors that bent and split light like the core of a digital network. When exposed to certain frequencies, the skull glowed, not from heat, but from resonance. And then the phenomena grew stranger. In labs across the world, when one crystal skull was activated, others, thousands of miles away, emitted faint, identical pulses, synchronized flashes, matching vibrations, light traveling not across cables but through space, as if the objects were somehow linked. Some theorized quantum entanglement, others suspected buried transmitters, but no explanation held. As more skulls were discovered, a pattern emerged. When brought together, they projected points of light, not at random, but in the shape of constellations. Some stars were familiar. Others had yet to be catalogued by astronomers. A cosmic map, from the perspective of somewhere not Earth. And then, most haunting of all, the skulls responded to people. Researchers found that emotional states changed the patterns of light. Calm brought steady glow. Agitation caused flares. With some individuals, the skulls would hum, a resonance just below the threshold of hearing, as if somehow these ancient objects were listening. Could they be artifacts of communication, vessels for memory? A system built not to transmit words, but thought, light, feeling? Their origin remains unknown. The quartz they are carved from contains rare isotopes not found in Earth's crust, more common in meteorites or in the theoretical cores of collapsed stars. Their creation would require heat, pressure, and control beyond any known ancient capability. And yet they sit silently on glass shelves, whispered about, locked away. There is something unnerving about a machine without wires, a transmitter made of silence, a face carved in stone that stares back, as if waiting for us to remember something long forgotten. The crystal skulls do not offer answers. Only questions reflected back in light. Perhaps they are not messages to us, but reminders of what we once knew, or who we once were. What if history was not lost, but encoded, waiting for the right eyes to read it? In the mountains along the border of China and Tibet, there is a quiet that feels eternal, wind through stone, time stacked in layers. In 1938, an expedition into these remote caves led archaeologists to a burial site unlike anything recorded in regional lore. Laid beside skeletal remains with elongated skulls were hundreds of carved stone discs, each about 2 feet wide, with a hole in the center like an ancient phonograph record. At first glance, they were dismissed as ritual objects. But then someone noticed the grooves, spirals etched with astonishing precision, barely visible to the naked eye. Under magnification, they weren't random lines. They were writing. Microscopic hieroglyphs, not ceremonial, not decorative, technical. In the 1960s, a Russian linguist named Dr. Sergei Ledov began decoding the symbols. What he found was not mythology, but a kind of instruction manual, densely packed with information about propulsion, space travel, even genetic engineering. The Dropa Stones, as they came to be known, told a story of beings who came from the stars, who crashed in these mountains, and who could not return. Their descendants, the discs claimed, lived among the local tribes, not as gods, as survivors. Most scientists scoffed, but the data wouldn't go away. When analyzed under modern spectrographic techniques, the stones revealed chemical anomalies. Trace elements common in asteroid impacts, iridium, osmium, and isotopes that didn't match any local geology. The disks were made of granite fused with metallic particles that gave off weak magnetic fields. When exposed to electrical current, some emitted low-frequency radio pulses, not loud but structured, as if they were still transmitting. Star charts etched into some of the disks showed constellations, with stellar positions matching not Earth's view, but one from outside our solar system. Even more perplexing, some of the mathematical formulas embedded in the symbols referenced gravitational interactions and propulsion methods not explored by human science until the 20th century. Whoever carved these was mapping deep space, long before telescopes. And then the most delicate detail, references to the body. The stones described adapting biology for different planetary environments, cellular modification, DNA restructuring. The language suggested not belief, but knowledge. Protocols for altering life to match the pressures of unfamiliar worlds. If true, it would mean our ancestors, or someone they encountered, understood genetics long before the discovery of the double helix. And yet, the Dropa Stones remain locked away, classified in military archives, their caves sealed. Their symbols only partially translated. Could the discs be a record left behind by exiles? Evidence not of conquest, but of survival, and of a message encoded in stone, in case memory faded? Or are they, as some believe, the remnants of a forgotten science once held by an ancient civilization, one that slipped from history not with a bang, but with erosion, dust, and time? They sit now, silent, their spiral grooves unreadable to most. But for those who've studied them, a question lingers. What kind of mind carves its knowledge into stone, in characters no one yet knows how to read, unless it believed we would return to them someday? What if perfection was placed on Earth long before we could measure it? Hidden in the lush jungles of Costa Rica lie silent enigmas, hundreds of stone spheres scattered like cosmic breadcrumbs. Some are small enough to cradle in your arms. Others stand taller than a man, perfectly round, impossibly smooth, carved with a precision that should not have existed in the pre-Columbian world. They were first uncovered in the 1930s, not by archaeologists, but by workers clearing land for a banana plantation. Bulldozers struck stone. At first it seemed unremarkable, until someone noticed the shape. And then another, and another. Soon a pattern emerged. Nearly 300 spheres formed from granodiorite, a hard volcanic rock, some weighing over 15 tons, some aligned to points on the horizon, all carved with mathematical precision. But who made them, and how? No tools from the supposed era, centuries before the Spanish conquest, could have shaped rock with this degree of perfection. The largest spheres vary in roundness by less than 2 millimeters. Even today, machining stone to that tolerance would require advanced lathes or computer-guided tools. Yet the spheres show no tool marks, no chisel scars, no grinding residue, just smooth, curved surfaces that seem to defy explanation. And then there's the question of placement. Some spheres appear in deliberate arrangements, lines, triangles, even spirals, that mirror constellations. When mapped, their locations correspond to the positions of stars as seen not from Earth, but from orbit, as if someone, or something, had a God's eye view of the sky and used the jungle floor as a canvas. In the 1970s, classified surveys using ground-penetrating radar revealed an even deeper mystery. Some spheres weren't solid. Beneath their surfaces lay internal chambers filled with alternate materials, lighter stone cores, layered geometries, engineered lattices with no apparent purpose. But the precision was unmistakable. Seismic tests later showed that when exposed to specific frequencies, the spheres vibrated in harmonic resonance, not audibly, but ultrasonically. Each sphere behaved like a tuning fork, vibrating at unique signatures, suggesting they were designed as acoustic instruments. For what purpose? No one can say. Even stranger, the stone used to make many of the spheres isn't native to the region. The nearest known quarries lie hundreds of miles away. To transport such heavy materials across dense jungle terrain without modern machinery would require a logistical mastery we cannot account for. Carbon dating of organic materials found beneath some spheres suggested their burial, or placement, occurred over 1,000 years ago, but inconsistencies emerged. In the same sphere, organic samples dated centuries apart, as if the objects themselves drifted through time or had been relocated with knowledge we don't possess. In one documented case, researchers found that objects placed near a certain sphere would experience tiny but measurable shifts in weight. A localized gravitational anomaly, slight but real, and unexplained. These are not idols. They are not monuments. They are something else. Precision devices left by a people we cannot name, made with tools we do not understand, aligned to patterns we are only beginning to see. Perhaps they were meant to mark time, or map the stars, or sing when the right voice was near. Or perhaps they were not meant for us at all. They rest now in open fields and museum courtyards, quietly magnificent, utterly alien in their perfection. And they leave behind a simple, disquieting question. What kind of mind dreams in spheres, and leaves them behind, untouched by time, to wait for someone who might understand? What if the earth itself once spoke to the heavens? Stretching across the high desert plains of southern Peru is one of humanity's most haunting messages, not written in stone or parchment, but inscribed directly into the land. The Nazca lines, massive geoglyphs carved into the soil more than 2,000 years ago. Birds, spirals, geometric paths that stretch for miles from the ground. They're invisible. From the sky, they speak. To whom? That remains the great mystery. Because while archaeologists have long believed the lines were ceremonial or astronomical in purpose, classified studies have suggested something far more sophisticated, something technological, something intentional. In the 1970s, researchers collaborating with NASA conducted ground-penetrating radar and aerial mapping of the Nazca region. What they discovered beneath the sand was stunning. Subsurface layers of compacted earth, deliberately fused into a glass-like crust, as if exposed to intense heat. The kind of heat generated not by torches or ritual fires, but by high-energy systems, perhaps lasers, capable of vitrifying soil. But why? Many of the longest Nazca lines are ruler-straight across vast distances, some over 30 miles long, maintaining perfect linearity across valleys, hills, and uneven terrain. This kind of surveying precision requires not just vision from the sky, but knowledge of spherical geometry and advanced trigonometry. It's not art, it's engineering. Some patterns align not with constellations, but with magnetic anomalies in subsurface water veins. Others point to rich mineral deposits hundreds of feet below. Knowledge of these hidden resources would have required geological tools, or aerial imaging, far beyond the capabilities of ancient civilizations. Even more remarkable were electromagnetic tests conducted in the classified sections of the project. When certain frequencies were directed towards specific geoglyphs, the patterns responded, not visibly, but energetically. They pulsed. They hummed. They amplified the signals and redirected them, creating narrow beams detectable from altitude. In other words, they transmitted. Several of the geometrical patterns behaved like antennas or beacons resonating at ultra-low frequencies. These frequencies are commonly used today for deep Earth communication and for signaling through the ionosphere. Could these lines have been used to guide something through the air, a vehicle, a drone, or something beyond either? The deeper mystery lies in their purpose. These were not randomly placed drawings. When mapped across the region, the Nazca lines form an interconnected network, a grid, that mimics aerial navigation systems used in modern aviation. Triangulations, corridors, landing alignments. Some researchers hypothesize they functioned as visual landing fields. Others believe they formed an energy system, harnessing natural electromagnetic forces to power or direct craft. Whatever their role, the evidence suggests a civilization that understood flight, not just conceptually, but practically. But perhaps the most haunting feature of the Nazca lines is what they imply about audience. These messages, these roads, these symbols, they were never meant to be seen from the Earth. They were made to be viewed from the sky, which leads us to wonder who was watching. Today, the Nazca lines are protected. Tourists fly above them in small aircraft, marveling at the hummingbird, the spider, the astronaut. But most fly away never knowing what lies beneath. The fused soils, the magnetic harmonics, the echoes of something greater. They leave behind a final dizzying question. What if our ancestors didn't just dream of the sky, but were building for something that once came from it? What if the future has already passed beneath our feet? In 1974, along the banks of the Mureș River in Romania, construction workers unearthed something strange. Beneath layers of sediment, alongside the fossilized bones of a mastodon, a creature extinct for over 10,000 years, was a wedge-shaped object, heavy and metallic. At first, they thought it was part of a tool, but when metallurgists tested it, the results defied logic. It was aluminum, not raw aluminum ore, refined, hardened, machined. But aluminum wasn't even isolated by modern science until the 19th century. In ancient times, it was unknown, impossible to smelt using primitive methods. And yet here it was, buried beside bones from the Ice Age, shining with an almost silvery sheen, untouched by time. Experts were puzzled. The object weighed nearly 5 pounds and bore geometric features, clean edges, curved surfaces, as if shaped with industrial tools. Some suggested it was a hoax. Others remained silent. But under magnification, the truth grew harder to ignore. The alloy wasn't pure. It contained trace elements, copper, zinc, silicon, in ratios not found in nature. These were not accidental impurities. They were engineered, designed for performance, similar to aerospace-grade materials used in modern aircraft manufacturing. Tool marks on the object showed signs of milling, precision that would require lathes, drills, or computer-controlled equipment. But no such technology existed at the time the mastodon roamed Eastern Europe. Even stranger, the aluminum showed no signs of oxidation. Natural aluminum corrodes rapidly in oxygenated environments, forming a dull layer. But this piece, this wedge, was smooth, untarnished, as if it had resisted aging itself. X-ray crystallography revealed a microscopic structure inconsistent with any known Earth-based manufacturing. Its internal lattice suggested it had been rapidly cooled, a process that requires extreme temperatures and controlled environments far beyond ancient metallurgy. Then came the isotopic analysis. The ratios of aluminum isotopes didn't match those found in Earth's crust. Instead, they resembled those predicted in high-energy cosmic formation, the kind produced in the hearts of stars or the remnants of supernova. In other words, the material itself may not be from Earth at all. Some theorized it was part of an aircraft, not of this century, but of another epoch. Perhaps a landing strut, a structural brace. Its shape, aerodynamic and functional, supported that theory. Others proposed something stranger still. that it had not merely been buried by time, but displaced by it. How does a piece of machined aluminum end up embedded in the soil for tens of thousands of years? Was it a remnant from a forgotten civilization, one that mastered metallurgy before written history? Or was it something left behind by an intelligence not born of this earth? Attempts to replicate the wedge's alloy and structure have failed to match its properties precisely. Today, the object is sealed in a Romanian archive, rarely shown to the public. Officially, it's an unidentified historical artifact. Unofficially, it's an impossibility. Sometimes it's not the complexity of a thing that startles us, but its placement. A plastic bottle in a dinosaur's jaw would be no less mysterious. The wedge shouldn't be there. And yet, there it is. Buried beside ancient bones, it offers no origin, no story, just a presence that refuses to fade. And a single, lingering question. What if time is not a line, but a circle, and some echoes from the future have already become fossils beneath our feet? What if invention did not begin with us? In 1998, while conducting a routine geological survey in the remote Kuznetsk region of Russia, scientists came across something embedded in ancient stone. It was small, barely visible without magnification, but unmistakably artificial. A screw. Less than a millimeter long, spiraled with perfect symmetry, encased within a rock formation dated to over 300 million years ago, a time when Earth's land was still one continent and the tallest life forms were ferns. The screw was made of tungsten, one of the densest and most heat-resistant metals known to science. A material difficult to work with even today, requiring high temperatures and specialized equipment to mold or machine. Yet here it was, in fossilized rock, laid down hundreds of millions of years before the first mammals emerged. Electron microscopy confirmed what the eye suspected. The threading was flawless, evenly spaced, mathematically precise, not grown, not formed through geological process, but made, designed, manufactured, and tungsten was no accident. With a melting point above 3,400 degrees, it is notoriously difficult to manipulate. Only in the last century has humanity developed the technology to machine tungsten at scale, typically for aerospace or nuclear applications. But the questions didn't stop there. Isotopic analysis revealed anomalies in the tungsten itself. Natural tungsten has a predictable ratio of isotopes, but this sample didn't match. It contained rare isotopes formed only in stellar explosions, supernovae, and not found in Earth's crust. In short, the material itself, like its placement in time, didn't belong. Skeptics claimed contamination, a modern screw that somehow infiltrated ancient rock. But further study found that the surrounding mineral matrix had fully crystallized around the object, locking it in place in a manner that could not be replicated artificially. The rock was undisturbed since the Carboniferous period. And this screw was not alone. In the years that followed, similar microscopic metallic objects were found in other geological formations, across Asia, Europe, and even in Australia, all buried in layers dated to times before complex life existed, all following similar design patterns, all impossibly old. No two were identical, but all were spiraled, threaded, mechanical. It was as if fragments of something larger had been scattered or preserved across epochs. Some scientists believe these objects are evidence of an advanced intelligence that existed before the rise of known life. Not human, not even terrestrial perhaps, but something capable of crafting technology at the microscopic scale using materials forged in the heart of stars. Others suggest they are relics of a forgotten human chapter, a civilization wiped clean by catastrophe, with only molecular traces left behind. Either way, the implications are staggering. A screw is not just a symbol of construction, it is a symbol of design. It reflects intention, repeatability, the logic of parts joining into whole. It is a language of machines. And this language, it seems, has spoken before us. Today, the Russian tungsten screw rests in a laboratory archive, protected but largely hidden. It is not part of our textbooks. It is not part of our story. But it should be, because it whispers of something we're not supposed to remember. And it leaves us with this unsettling thought. What if the first tools were not made by hands like ours, but left behind as seeds, waiting for us to discover, and perhaps to recognize ourselves in them? What if matter could think, heal, and wait? In 1984, deep within South Africa's ancient rock layers, the kind that predate all complex life, miners unearthed something utterly baffling. A smooth metallic sphere, about 4 inches wide, etched with 3 parallel grooves circling its equator. At first glance, it looked like a decorative object, perhaps a man-made ball that somehow ended up buried in the wrong place. But the rock encasing it was dated at 2.8 billion years old, from a time when Earth's skies were red and the only life was microbial. So what was it? A toy? A relic? Or something far more profound? Tests showed the sphere was made of a nickel-steel alloy, remarkably pure, with an internal composition that suggested it had been shaped not by natural forces, but by intelligent design. No human civilization existed at the time, not even the hint of one. But it wasn't just its presence that stirred unease, it was its behavior. When placed inside a sealed display case at the Klerksdorp Museum, the sphere began to move. Slowly, steadily, it rotated on its own axis, completing a full turn approximately every 128 hours. No magnets, no motors, no vibration, just motion. When measured, the surrounding environment revealed low-level electromagnetic fields fluctuating in response to the sphere's movement, as if something inside it were generating power. Yet no batteries, no seams, no wiring. Attempts to scratch or drill into the sphere failed. Tools bounced off its surface. Laser scans revealed a density and resilience inconsistent with any known alloy. And when superficial damage was finally inflicted, something stranger still occurred. It healed. Microscopic abrasions vanished within hours. Surface indentations faded. It was as if the sphere remembered its original shape and returned to it. Self-repairing metal, a material that acted less like a rock and more like an organism. X-ray scans revealed internal structures, not random mineral patterns, but organized lattices at the nanoscale, geometries that echoed artificial design, similar to microprocessors, similar to machinery. And still the sphere remained silent. No signals, no sounds, just subtle emissions, radio waves, low-frequency pulses, sometimes spiking in the presence of humans. Some researchers claimed the sphere reacted to thought, to attention, to proximity. It would hum softly when approached by certain individuals. Others felt heat. A few reported an eerie sense of being watched. Of course, these observations were never published in scientific journals. The sphere was quietly removed from public display. Today it resides in a classified facility, studied, protected, feared. So what is it? A beacon? A data core? A machine from before machines? Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Or perhaps it was always waiting. Some believe it's a kind of intelligence, not conscious in the way we define it, but aware, designed to endure, to adapt, to outlast civilizations. Built not of circuits and wires, but of matter shaped by laws we haven't yet uncovered. We often assume that intelligence must look like us, that technology must speak in our languages. But what if the most advanced forms of knowledge aren't loud, or fast, or obvious? What if they are patient? What if they are already here, humming softly beneath the dust? What if the human mind was never meant to be alone? Of all the strange artifacts uncovered across Earth, few are as intimate or as haunting. As the crystal skulls, they are shaped like us, measured to our proportions, etched in glass-clear quartz with anatomical precision that rivals medical replicas. But they are not copies. They are not art. They are enigmas, each carved from a single block of crystal, without seams, without tool marks, and often without explanation. The most famous, the so-called Mitchell-Hedges skull, was discovered in the 1920s in a collapsed Mayan temple in Belize. It was nestled in the ruins as if placed deliberately, not buried, but preserved, waiting. We've already seen that these skulls are not unique. They've been found across the globe, in Mexico, Mongolia, Tibet. Carved from quartz, the same mineral used in modern electronics for its piezoelectric properties. But these skulls do more than hold light. They bend it, they direct it, and perhaps they respond to it. When engineers at Hewlett-Packard tested the Mitchell-Hedges skull, they were astonished, not just by the clarity of the crystal, which would be nearly impossible to achieve without modern polishing tools, but by how it had been carved against the natural axis of the quartz. Doing so today would shatter the material. To do it then, with no visible abrasions, no fractures, defies belief. And then they found the inner channels. Microscopic tunnels within the skull refracted light like fiber optics. These weren't random. They were aligned, structured, capable of transmitting signals. Some researchers believed the skulls functioned as optical devices. Others began to wonder, communication tools, memory banks, consciousness interfaces? Because the deeper the study, the stranger they became. When multiple skulls were gathered in proximity, researchers observed a phenomenon that felt less like coincidence and more like conversation. Light patterns would shift in synchrony. Pulses in one skull would echo in another, sometimes hundreds of miles away. A kind of quantum resonance. And then there were the human effects. People in the presence of the skulls reported altered emotional states, lucid dreams, sudden insights. The patterns of light inside the crystal changed depending on who was near, not from temperature or breath, but seemingly from thought. Could the skulls be reading consciousness, or more unnervingly, remembering it? Later tests revealed that the quartz used in many of the skulls contained trace isotopes not typically found in Earth's crust. Some match materials expected from neutron star remnants. In other words, stellar origins. And when mapped, the star fields etched or reflected within some skulls include constellations not visible from our current night sky. Some of the stars haven't yet been officially cataloged. Others seem to show stellar arrangements from tens of thousands of years in the past or future. Are the skulls records, maps, or messages? Unlike the hard drives and screens of modern devices, the skulls offer no user manual, no login screen, only stillness. And yet, many who encounter them walk away with the same impression. This is not an object. It is a presence. What if these artifacts were designed to interface with something we still barely understand? Not machines, but minds? What if the most advanced civilizations don't store their knowledge in books or code, but in forms that speak directly to the human brain? We think of intelligence as external, but the crystal skulls suggest something different, that technology and consciousness may not be separate paths. That perhaps at the edges of thought, memory, and matter they meet. And in that intersection, something waits, watching, remembering, reflecting us. What if the greatest secrets were never lost, only locked away? Throughout this journey, we've explored the impossible, objects that remember, metals that move, machines that calculate time itself. But perhaps the strangest mystery of all is not what these artifacts are, but where they've gone, because nearly every one of them, from the Roswell alloy to the living metal sphere, shares a final destination: disappearance, stored, classified, hidden. Why? Governments have long possessed the tools of silence: vaults, non-disclosure orders, black budgets. But secrecy, in these cases, doesn't seem driven by fear of public panic. These are not weapons, not threats. They are questions. And questions in the wrong context can be dangerous. What would happen if it became widely accepted that human civilization was not the first? That metallurgy, astronomy, nanotechnology, all the hallmarks of modern science had appeared before? Disappeared, reappeared. What if progress wasn't a line, but a loop? Across continents, scientists with the highest security clearances have studied these artifacts in controlled conditions. Some breakthroughs, like modern memory alloys, fiber optics, or composite materials, may even owe their origins to these classified studies. But the cores remain untouched, unexplainable, and ultimately unreleased. The language used in declassified documents is always careful, anomalous, unconventional, unaccounted for. Never alien, never non-human, not because such words are false, but because they're unmanageable. To name a thing is to own it. To name something beyond comprehension, that's something most institutions are not built to endure. Consider the consistency. Each time one of these artifacts is found, the story follows a pattern. Initial excitement, confusion, a few brave articles. And then, silence. The object disappears into institutional shadow. The site is sealed, the narrative rewritten. The spheres become decorative. The batteries are recast as ceremonial. The gears are just astronomy. The official story remains unchanged, not because it is true, but because it is stable. But here is the quiet revelation. These artifacts still exist, somewhere, in labs, in vaults, in quiet corners of the world where science is practiced without press releases. And if they exist, then so does the possibility of rediscovery. Some say the truth is hidden to protect us. Others believe it's hoarded for power. But perhaps, just perhaps, the truth is buried because we are not yet ready to face what it implies. That intelligence did not begin with us. That our story is not the only one, and that the universe may be older, wiser, and far more inhabited than we've dared to imagine. In every generation, there are a few who stumble across the edges of this knowledge, in stone, in crystal, in fragments of metal. They don't always know what they've found, but they feel its weight, its silence, its invitation, because beneath the secrecy, beyond the locked vaults, these artifacts are still speaking, not loudly, but clearly. What if the past is not behind us, but waiting ahead? We began with a question. What if memory could lie? Now we end with another. What if memory could return? For thousands of years, we've told ourselves a single story of human ascent from darkness to light, from fire to language, from wheels to wires. A neat progression, a straight line. But the artifacts we've followed on this journey do not obey that line. They don't fit within it. They twist it, break it, rebuild it into something less familiar, but perhaps more honest. A memory metal that resets itself like thought. A quartz skull that mirrors our emotions. A screw spun into stone before there were hands to turn it. These aren't just archaeological riddles, they are mirrors. They reflect a version of ourselves that is older, stranger, more complex than we've imagined. And perhaps not alone. These objects are real, not myths, not allegories, not visions born in fevered minds. They've been held, measured, scanned. They sit in rooms guarded by silence, not because they are dangerous in the way of bombs or viruses, but because they ask dangerous questions. Where did this come from? Who made it, and why does it feel so familiar? Each artifact is a breadcrumb, scattered across deserts, mountains, and oceans. They don't form a complete picture, not yet, but they hint at a deeper thread running through history, a thread that suggests the human story may not be a solo tale, but a conversation, one we've forgotten how to hear. We are not here to convince, not to argue, not to expose. That's not what this story is for. This story is for the part of you that has always wondered why pyramids echo starlight, why ancient maps show ice-free Antarctica, why machines appear buried in stone that predates mammals. This story is not about answers. It's about returning to the question. Because the truth may not lie in proving these artifacts real or not real. The truth may lie in what they awaken, in how they make us feel when we stand before them. Awed, humbled, curious, ready. We may never know who made them. We may never find the civilization or intelligence that left them behind, but we are beginning to remember what they represent. That discovery doesn't end with the known. That wonder is a kind of wisdom, that some knowledge waits for us to catch up, and that the universe, even now, is speaking, not always in sirs, but in silence, in metal, in stone, in echoes. All we have to do is listen. What if the greatest frontier is not out there, but inside the forgotten corridors of our own memory? Perhaps we are the mystery we've been trying to solve.